Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today and hopefully also tomorrow. My name is Doreen de Bruin, and I'm part of this symposium's organizing committee at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, which has been, as Reine and Wayne described very well, a wonderful collaboration with the Research Center for Material Culture. And for those of you who are just joining us now, it is my pleasure to represent Beatrice van Boorman, who you just saw giving us a tour. Beatrice is a curator of modern art at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, and she mounted the exhibition Kirchner and Nolde, Expressionism, Colonialism. As she is presenting throughout the day, I just mention her name and invite you to consult the website for all the bios. You can find the link to that in the chat. I do, however, want to introduce Erna Lilia, with whom she will be in conversation afterwards and underscore Erna's contribution to the exhibition. Dr. Erna Lilia is curator, Indigenous Knowledge and Material Culture. Her work focuses on South Coast New Guinea material culture. And in late 2019, she joined the existing exhibition advisory group, whose members Beatrice had been consulting in relation to Papua New Guinea. They provided expertise in relation to the history, the cultures, and material culture collections of New Guinea. And for Erna, their collective contribution helped to think through ways to represent New Guineans in the exhibition as cultural diverse, possessed of history and traditions, and as having agency even in the constraining contexts such as colonial occupation. And as the visitors' contemporaries and not people stuck in the past. And as such, the group engaged the Eternal Museum exhibition paradox of being both specific and general about complex things. In the exhibition, there's a video of Erna viewing a photo album at the Missie Museum style. And in it, she reflects on the images that date from the German colonial period. And the photos were a way to talk about what people may have been experiencing at the time, and what colonialism and missionization actually meant on the ground, major rapid social changes and losses and disruptions that it entails. Beatrice and Erna will now share their screens, come to the digital stage and have a conversation about the exhibition and what it means. Erna's already there.
Thank you, Doreen. I feel like this is about me now. It was such a good introduction. So welcome, Beatrice. And thank you for agreeing to have this conversation with me. I think so far we've already had a really strong start to the beginning of this seminar series. And quite a lot has already been covered in the video and in the director's conversation about the objectives and the scope of the exhibition, or what was hoped for, and some of the outcomes of that too, some of the blowback. But my hope for this conversation is a little different in that I hope to dive a bit more into the how of things. So how you went about it. And I understand that that's a very long answer and a very complex one, and we have limited time. So we did a bit of preparation ahead of time. But I think that we can all learn from specific examples, right, by getting into the detail of things. So one of the things that came up again when I was watching the video was that othering, or the artist's othering of their subjects, it wasn't constrained to the colonies. It's something that they did wherever they were, including, you know, women, Black people who were in Germany already, and children. And in our discussion in preparation, I mentioned that one of the really stark points for me in the exhibition was the image of a young girl, and it's a photo, and she has a very knowing look on her face. I wonder if you could talk a bit more about the range of otherings and how you chose to deal with that in the exhibition.
Yes, thank you. I'm just sharing my screen because we do have an image of that. it's like you say, I mean, othering is really a central point in this exhibition, and this is why we included also the child models here, in particular Frenzy, or Lina Franziska Fehrmann, who was quite a well-known model of not only Kirchner, but also fellow artists from Die Brücke, like Hecke and Bechstein. And there has been a lot of attention for her and other child models. There have been exhibitions on them as well. I don't think they've been looked at in this context of the colonial times the artists were living in. Because of course, what you see is that she is depicted in a context of the studio that was very much exoticized by Kirchner. I mean, he looked for inspiration, of course, in the various museums and so on, ethnographic museums, and he tried to imitate that style and make it his own and replicate it through tapestries and textiles and sculptures and other decorations in the studio. And the models, of course, moved within this environment and became part of it. So there was an amount of othering going on just because of the models moving in the context of the studio, you could say. Plus, that he depicted Frenzy, in particular in a painting that we have in the Stedelijk, which you can see here. This is the photograph we were talking about. Present. Seems to be a problem with the video. Can you not see the PowerPoint then?
No.
Okay, sorry. To do this, I was thinking that everybody could see this. Okay.
Now it works, right?
Yeah. Does it work now? Yeah.
No.
Anna can't see it.
Oh, is it just me? Then I can.
No, there's something seems to be still wrong. It's on the screen. Okay, Anna, you can't see it for some reason.
Oh, okay. I'll fix mine. Sorry. Go on.
Yeah, no, what we see now is this photograph we've been talking about of Frenzy and the young man, we don't know his name, it's a boy. And next to it, the painting that we have in the Stedelijk of Frenzy. It's called Nude Behind the Curtain. And she is in the environment of the studio. Next to her is a Cameroonian chair that Kirchner had in his studio. And it's not really very recognizable as such, but it's the object that's to her left. And behind her, you see these kinds of curtains and textiles that Kirchner designed. And which at this time, the studio decoration, the textiles that were in the studio had erotic scenes on them, couples copulating and so on. And so it was very much an erotic context. And Frenzy is depicted with kind of black hair and kind of slanted eyes. So she does look different from what she actually looked in reality, and is more exoticized, as it were. She's made to look really like the decoration, I mean, imitating really a kind of visual language that appropriates a language from outside of Europe, and it's made to look non-European, basically, you could say. So that's the othering that's going on there, and this goes back, of course, to Gauguin, of which we have an image here, who also painted his nude models in this kind of context. Using visual elements from different continents. I mean, this is not even, visual language is not even that of Tahiti, where the model is from, but from all kinds of contexts. And so, yeah, I have here another image. You can see the early studio decoration, the early textiles with these couples. And you can also see the eroticizing of these child models, really. Not only in Kirchner's work, but also in Heckel's and in Pechstein's. So yeah, some people thought that it was too much suggested, that there was maybe abuse. What is definitely there is abuse of power, because these child models, they came from poor families. They did this because they needed to earn a living. And they started posing, Francie started posing nude at the age of 8 for these artists. There's something, you can say it's all innocent, but there is all, at the same time, something dubious about all the artists being nude with these child models, and also going together with them into nature and all being nude together. It wasn't all that innocent. There was a lot of abuse going on at the time in any case, and at the very least, they were used or abused, if you want, in the name of aesthetics, or a certain type of aesthetics.
And do you think that the implication that you're drawing here in the exhibition is one of the points that has caused criticism by members of the public, for example? You're kind of assailing the image of the artist as somehow a better kind of human. And
yes, to my surprise, this point raised some criticism, although it's not actually new. We're not actually the first to mention this. There have been exhibitions on Kirchen where this has been quite a lot more explicitly stated than we do it. Mm-hmm. We try to be careful in our formulations, not to accuse the artists, but at the same time, of course, we do mention the abuse of power that is there, in our opinion. So it's not entirely neutral. Nothing is ever neutral. We'll come to that in a moment, I'm sure. It's not meant as a kind of accusatory note. It's just really a fact that from today's perspective, at the very least, but also I think if you look at it then, that it was not okay for these children to have to pose nude in this context for the artists.
And also so Francie she's the child of a poor family.
Yeah.
So would we see the child of a rich family in any of these pictures? It's, to me, that also is evidence that it's about power and taking advantage of power.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and they come into a similar role in a way as the other models do, but they have much less choice in the matter, I would say. And although there were a lot of children who were modeling nude at the time for artists, and of course there were also female artists who painted nude children, there's still this issue of the abuse of power, you could say. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you already mentioned neutrality. I wonder if you'd like to move on to, actually, in the video you talked about in the Papua New Guinea rooms. So I'm making a claim for the rooms as being part of Papua New Guinea now, as a kind of counter-colonial thing. You made mention of trying to circumvent viewing Papuans through the eyes of Nolde, so to provide a different perspective that took him out of the picture and let that breathe. But as you've already mentioned, you had trouble actually identifying many people, so you had to find other strategies. And one of those, I recall, is the production of a video. And that video, I thought, was really thoughtfully done, a good way to come to grips with the diversity, well, communicating very complex things in a form that could sit in an exhibition. About the diversity and complexity of Papua New Guinea. Perhaps you'd like to talk to that?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, of course, the video was very much a joint effort of our small group, because it was something that we thought about. How can you, maybe I would like to start with a quote by Regis Topstella, who is was an author from Papua New Guinea. Unfortunately, he's already passed away. About the importance of place. He says, land and place in the understanding of indigenous people are integral and cannot be separated. Land place is regarded as an extension of the indigenous identity, a discourse of belonging through which identity itself is constructed. So taking into account these different notions of place means that when you show objects from or artworks from Papua New Guinea, like in this case, masks from your island and a movie figure from your island, then you need to take into account that it's linked to people and also to place, of course, and normally you would see them in movement. So how do you take all of that into account? And one thing we discussed is that on the one hand, it would be important to show historic photographs, to show also the things that Mulder left out in his paintings and drawings. And on the other hand, it would be good to have sound, to have music from that period, so that you can, make it clear, bring this object more to life, and to make clear how it is linked to the place really and to the people. So that's what we try to do in the video. So I want to show you a short fragment of it, and what you will see is we've chosen 5 places that Arnoldo visited, and you see historic photographs and contemporary photographs for every place, and connected with music from that time and from the time when Nolde was there, connected really from that place. So maybe we can look at this minute of the video.
I apologize for turning my camera off. I've got a small noise.
No problem.
So yeah.
Sander, could you start it, please? The video. No, nothing happening. Yeah.
No.
Sander, can you please start the video? Or maybe he's not hearing me.
I think maybe I just don't share your screen.
Yeah, that's a good point. Starting from the beginning now, I wanted to show the part on Rabaul, but it's fine. You can get an impression like this.
Yeah, that's lovely. I saw the part of the development when you were putting it together, choosing the archival sounds from archives, mostly in Germany, I think. And
That's right.
it was actually quite hard to hear the voices and the music because of the crackle that was present in those recordings. So the sound engineer did an amazing job because it's lifted out the sound from these really crackly recordings.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because it really sounded pretty awful
Yeah.
before. I mean, I really thought, when I heard the sounds first, I thought we wouldn't be able to use it.
Yeah.
But it worked out in the end. Yeah, but it's interesting how it changes the perception in that room, because it's
yes,
it's
yeah,
actually
because you haven't the whole time, and plus the environmental sounds that the sound people also put in of insects and birds and leaves and the sea.
True. Yeah. I think the important thing is what we've been discussing, of course, is that I mean, representation is never neutral, obviously, and what Nolde depicted from Papua New Guinea very much corresponded with his own search for authenticity and his own what he wanted. He saw what he wanted to see, basically.
Yeah.
And so what we are trying to do is really to situate these works much more clearly. And so we've been discussing how these different elements could talk to each other, photographs and his works, and the artworks from New Ireland, which of course have also been collected by German colonizers. So yeah, they all together, they tell quite a different story, I think.
Yes, and I think the collections, as you say, they're a result of the colonial situation. They couldn't have happened otherwise. They couldn't be here otherwise. But we can't undo that. We can't unscramble that particular egg. But what we can do is present things in contexts where they do more than stand in for racial difference, for example. You know, we don't know why those things were collected in particular necessarily, but now they're standing in there as kind of ambassadors, as representatives of people from Papua New Guinea. Yeah, they do a different job. Their quality is such, because their artworks is that they can be used to do different things. And in this case, it's doing something very useful, which is making Papua New Guineans present in the exhibition. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really like that you used the scholar Stella before as well, because that's also another technique that can be used, which is to literally include the voices of Papua New Guineans today to think about that history.
Yes, yeah. He was a very interesting thinker, really.
Yeah.
And his book about Papua New Guinea is, I think, one of the very few post-colonial perspectives on Papua New Guinea written by a Papua New Guinean.
Yeah.
So it's actually a pity that he died so young. Yeah, I have another quote by him, actually, which I wanted to
great
mention, on representation. He says, representation is always the domain of those in power. The depictions of the Papua New Guinean landscape and of the inhabitants illustrate the representative's background. Stories about venturing into new lands also construct cultural superiority and imperial power. So I think that's really interesting, of course, because it says a lot also about how Nolde, how Nolde went about depicting Papua New Guinea in a way.
Yeah.
And I mean, people say, but he liked people there. He liked the country there. So it wasn't all negative. But it's not really about that. It's about that he was part from a colonial empire, and in the context of a colonial expedition went there. So the whole premises of his journey, they were already different. I mean, they were not in any way neutral, or I mean, he wasn't going to. Yeah, I mean, it formed his gaze, obviously, to go within this context, travel within this context.
And actually, you state that you state that in some of the wall text, I recall. It's actually, he went there with an idea to documenting documenting racial difference and types, and so that was actually part of his agenda to start with.
Yeah. I mean, he said himself that he saw these watercolor portraits that he made that are really quite beautiful.
Yeah.
He said that he saw this as his demographic contribution to the expedition. So I mean, and you have to imagine at that time, the doctors, they took along these kind of what do you call them, skin scarves and hair scarves and so on. So in order to identify certain types, and that was pretty normal thinking at that time in physical anthropology. And I mean, Nolde was very much, of course, a child of his time, and also was aware of that. And so I'm sure that part of the portraits that he made were, at least partly, they were also seen in this light as representing different types, even though they're, of course, not naturalist in any way.
Yeah.
It's not like artists too. Earlier there were expeditions accompanied by artists. Vogel was a very well-known example, for example, accompanying the Hamburger Südsee expedition in 1908. But he was depicting very naturalist scenes. And of course, when Nolde was being invited for this expedition, they knew that he wasn't going to do that.
Yeah.
He just had his own agenda. And in his memoirs, it's quite interesting because he complains repeatedly about colonialism destroying this country, but of course, at the same time, being there as a colonist.
Yeah.
There's really quite a paradox in that.
Yes, and also a paradox in, I forget the exact name, it's the German movement towards naturism and the free body movement, and that becoming more free, in a way more basically human or more primitive, whilst also being a racist. So it seems odd to want to protect something, want to imitate something, but at the same time thinking that that thing is somehow racially a lesser thing. So yeah, it's a very complex kind of story to tease out, and not one that can be told simply.
Yeah, and I mean, even expecting people to stay the same there,
yes.
In spite of the presence of Europeans there, he expected the natives, as it were, to just stay the same and not change a bit. And I mean, I imagine that when people, I mean, I'm looking at this photograph of these three men on Manus Island. And I think that this was kind of the archetypal image of the native, as it were, in Papua New Guinea at the time. And actually, the same photograph appeared in at least 3 different archives I consulted. So apparently it circulated quite widely. And then when you look at it next to Nolde's painting of 2 Manus men, then you see the same kind of stereotypical idea of people from there. I mean, they're not individualized, they're quite stereotypical features. I mean, they're not, you don't see people there, you see a kind of stereotype. And I mean, this is probably one of the paintings that was painted afterwards, and not in front of the model. And maybe he even did use photographs to remind himself what people looked like, because all of his paintings were lost during his journey. And so he started repainting things. But still, I mean, with these kinds of paintings, of course, he contributes to kind of certain perception of Papua New Guineans in Europe.
Yeah, I find I really dislike that painting. It's a caricature, it's somehow a racist painting, and I can't put my finger on the one element. It's just, I really, when I walk in the room, I'm already angry. On the other hand, the black and white photo, which whatever the motivations for me, working with black and white photos as a Papua New Guinean, and it's something I go into in the video that we made at the Missy Museum when I was talking about the photographs in the photograph album from the German colonial period. They're not unsavable for me. So even if the intention of the photographer is to document some exotic, stereotypical thing, actually, well, these are still people wearing their finery. They're individuals, so they're potentially portraits in the future if their descendants identify them. There are elements in there that can still be reclaimed and made use of by current generations. So it's a savable thing. But the painting to me is not savable in the same way. Whereas, as you say, the watercolors from earlier, where he's probably, you know, much closer to the moment of encountering these individuals, don't have the same impact as this painting. It's very peculiar.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, also there's a difference. The watercolors were painted in front of the model, and the paintings weren't. They were painted in the studio, so you can see that very much. And interesting also when you look at the photograph, and it's supposed to show people in their traditional outfit, which it does, of course, but this one man is wearing a European axe across his shoulder.
Yeah.
So there is influence of colonialism even there in this photograph.
Well, I would put it differently and actually say, rather than influence, it's people doing what people do, which is if they see some better thing that they want to now use, well, they're going to use that better thing. So
people change and adapt, of course.
Yeah. And so
I think we probably have to wrap it up.
Okay.
But if there's another...
Oh, yes, we do.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, any final words that you'd like to say before going into, well, not final, obviously.
That sounds awful. No, I mean, I think that a lot of this is an attempt, I think, to show these works in a different way, and to get rid of this presumed neutrality, which doesn't really exist, and to say a little bit more about the context. But it's not a kind of final answer or anything. I mean, I think that probably we opened up more cans of worms and more questions than that we find answers in a way. Yes, but that's fine, I guess.
And as Wayne said, it's a promise for the future. So,
well, I do hope that other people will pick up where we left off. That would be great.
Well, thank you very much, and I think we'll
thank you also, and also for your great contribution.
Oh, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just checking to see that technically everything is all right. You can hear me fine? Everybody happy? Brilliant. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Karin Zaiman. I'm a research associate at the Research Center for Material Culture. And I'm originally from Cape Town in South Africa, but I'm now living in the Netherlands. So I also have an interest in thinking about how colonialism, European colonialism, is presented in museums and in institutions here. So this exhibition and this discussion is quite very close to my heart. As a matter of just of housekeeping, to mention that we will have a number of speakers in the session, all of whom I will introduce very briefly, simply by title and affiliation, but that the bios are available on the website. So I encourage the audience to go and look at the exciting work that people have been doing. The other aspect of this session that I think is important to draw attention to at this stage is that we would like to encourage discussion, Q&A, so please make use of the Q&A function in Zoom for that, and we will try and pose your questions to the speakers as well. Thank you very much also to Beatrice and Anna for the discussion and for illuminating some of the ideas that have gone into the exhibition and the project. And as a curator, somebody particularly interested in curatorship, I'm always struck by the thought that curatorship is about making the invisible visible. The interesting thing about a project such like the Kirchner Nolde exhibition is that it is happening with connections to other institutions as well, namely the Statens Museum voor Kunst, as well as the Brücke Museum. And apart from that, even there have been numerous projects over the decades that have looked at especially modernism's drawing on colonial objects and relationship to colonial objects, so-called stylistic inventions. So there's, apart from the artworks and the objects that we're looking at, there's also an exhibitionary legacy behind an exhibition such as this one. The interesting thing for me about thinking across these institutions is it lays bare that the hand of the curator or the museum, the way it gets framed within that institution and through the vision of the curators. The session that we're going to start now looks a little bit across these different institutions, comparing notes, thinking about different approaches, different ways of coming at some of the issues that have surfaced in the discussion so far. So with that, I want to hand over to our first two speakers, namely Doortje Agese, who's Chief Curator and Senior Researcher with the Department of Painting and Sculpture at the Statens Museum voor Kunst in Copenhagen, and also to, again, to Beatrice van Boorman, Curator of Art from 1860 to 1960 at the Stedelijk Museum Amsterdam, and who mounted the exhibition Kirchner and Nolde. And Beatrice and Doortje will be speaking about the different responses that I've had to this subject matter. So with that, can I invite Beatrice and Doortje to start? Thank you.
Thank you, Karin. I will just try to share my screen again, but then you have to unshare first. Somebody has to unshare.
There we go. It looks like it's working now.
Okay. Yeah. Can everybody see this now?
We can see the PowerPoint in its broad, but we're not seeing the presentation part. We're just seeing that in the application section.
You need help with this? Sorry.
No worries. Brilliant. That's good. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, it stopped, changed for whatever reason. Okay. This is not working. I'll try once more. Yeah, I can't forward it to the next slide for some reason. If it doesn't work, then I'll have to ask Sander.
Yeah,
now it works.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, great. Dorte, would you like to start?
Yes. Yes. Hello, everybody. And thank you very much to the Stedelijk Museum and the National Museum for World Cultures for organizing this event. I think it's just a real wonderful opportunity for all of us to reflect together and to discuss while this exhibition is still on view. It has been a very long, complicated process for us that have been working on it all along. And brought up a lot of questions, a lot of difficult decisions had to be made. So it is a great privilege to have the opportunity now, while we're still in the middle of it, to think about it together. And I would also like to say that the reception that was described in the beginning by Rein Wolfs was very similar to what we experienced in Copenhagen. So that is also something to think about, that it provokes very strong feelings, also in different contexts, and very related reactions. So I'm going to say a few sort of introductory words. So those of you that have been listening in from the beginning have already heard quite a bit about what is kind of the key topic of this show. But so I'm just going to go back to the very beginning and so to confirm that, in fact, the first thinking about this project happened in 2016. So that's quite a long time ago. And then we really started in earnest our collaboration in 2017 on the show, the Stedelijk Museum and the Staatsmuseum of Kunst, where I'm from. And then the Brugge Museum came in at a later point, and that is also why we are presenting separately now, because Beatrice and I had a very long, very close collaboration, and so the core topic and the core take of the material is very similar in our two institutions, although they look pretty different because we had different designers, and there are also different decisions made in specific places, but we had a kind of very much kind of a joint process, whereas the Brugge Museum is a different situation. So our colleague from there will present afterwards what is the particular take there. And so from in the very beginning, I mean, you have to understand what our museum is like. It's a National Gallery of Denmark. It's a museum of 700 years of primarily Western art. So that is kind of the frame I'm working within. The exhibition, or the idea for the exhibition, started with, we have this Nolde collection that was bequeathed to the museum by Nolde himself. And actually a collection that we have never really worked actively with. We've been lending our works to various monographic Nolde exhibitions, but we never did a major show on this collection before. And I always thought when we do it, we can't just, we have to think about what to do with this collection today. So the idea was really to ask ourselves, what is at stake in these works that is relevant to a contemporary situation? How can we move the perspectives? How can we ask new questions that develop our understanding of these artworks? And I consider that kind of a core function of our responsibility of a museum, always to work actively with the cultural heritage that we are taking care of, and to make sure that we are constantly rethinking interpretations and presentations, and asking ourselves what sense it makes in a contemporary society. And then the idea was to focus on Nolde's trip to Papua New Guinea that we heard about before, 1913-14. He went on this expedition, or he traveled along with some doctors going to Papua New Guinea, what was then German New Guinea, and to sort of expand the perspective, to ask, so what was the frame, what was the setup, what was the situation there, and how does that have to do with the historical situation he was operating in? And the idea to bring in Kirchner was actually to kind of get away from a classic monographic reading and to look for an artist that was working in the same historical situation, in the same, I mean, also in Berlin and Dresden, in the same environment, more or less, but developing a different take on the topic. As we heard, Kirchner was staging interiors in his studios where he was performing, trying out new ways of living new relationship between women and children, new ideas of sexuality and so on, new ideas of furnishing, creating an environment for himself. And these two artists and their very different takes would kind of function as complementary examples that all were developed in the same context. So a method to sort of talk about something in more general terms, investigate the field without sort of getting into all the issues that are at stake in a monographic reading. Yes, and the slide here you just show that's just two key works, one from the Statens Museum for Kunst, one from the Statlich Museum, Arnold and the Kirchner, and two key works in our collections that are related to the topic of the exhibition. The Nolde painting is what was made on the way to Papua New Guinea when he was traveling through Siberia, and the Kirchner painting, as we heard before, representing his studio interior and the model Franzi there. So that was what brought our two institutions together in the first place. And then, yeah, the idea was to really to expand the story and talk about the historical situation of these works. And I think, Beatrice, this is a moment I hand over to you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's good that you say that, Dorte, because of course the initiative was yours and the idea was originally yours, and I'm really grateful that you brought it to us and that we had this wonderful collaboration. So here we have a map of the world, which looks a little bit different. We've seen it already in the video. What we see here is in dark gray the German colonies, and we try to give a very, very short overview of German colonialism and of Kirchner and Nolde here. So maybe just the most important facts very briefly for those who are not so much familiar with German colonialism. The German Empire was founded in 1871, and soon afterwards Germany developed colonial exhibitions. A little bit late in the process, other European countries were much earlier, like the Netherlands, of course, who have been controlling through trade mostly countries in the global south since the 17th century, we could say. Here we see the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885, where Bismarck invited 11 European states, as well as the United States and the Ottoman Empire. There was no African head of state invited, although the issue at stake was the division of Africa. The Sultan of Zanzibar had actually originally requested to be present, but was ridiculed. The present states then divided up Africa, which was called afterwards the Scramble for Africa, because really all of Africa was divided between these states. And over the next 2 decades, the German Empire also took an increasingly active role in other parts of the world, including what was then called German New Guinea. And this resulted in many results and uprisings, which were usually brutally suppressed. The most famous one, of course, being the one of the Herero and Nama in today's Namibia, then German Southwest Africa, where in 1904, 1908, where Germans killed between 40 and 60,000 Herero and around 10,000 Nama. This was also classified as the first genocide of the 20th century. The ethnographic museums were founded mostly in the 1870s, some later, but they were able to build up their collections, usually thanks to German colonialism and imperialism and its infrastructure. So often they were missionaries and tradesmen who went first and collected the objects, and tradesmen, like I already mentioned in the guided tour, sometimes receiving a medal if they collected objects and donated them to the museum. So by collecting works outside of Europe, they were able to improve their status in the German Empire.
Yeah, so as has also been mentioned before, this has been a collaborative effort to an extent that I think none of us ever experienced before. So within our own institutions, we have also been, it's not just Beatrice and I, we've both been working very closely with colleagues. I had particularly two colleagues, a PhD student, Anna Vestergaard Jørgensen, and interpreter and researcher, Mette Holberg, who are both in this Zoom space and who will be joining the conversation or will be able to enter the conversation during the session too. But in addition to our own teams, we've been reaching out from a very early stage. And it actually started with this seminar in Copenhagen, just outside Copenhagen, December 2017, which was sort of a 2-day session that didn't involve audiences. So it was sort of a very confined group of people that have been brought in from various disciplines, anthropology, history. There were also artists, there were different people that all had in one way or another knowledge within this field. Some of them, 2 of them had also been organizing exhibitions recently about related to this topic. And this was really to try out the cross-disciplinary method because we could see that, you know, moving forward like that, expanding the field, we very quickly realized that this went far beyond our own competences. That was one thing. And of course, as also from the very beginning, we've been discussing the problems of our own position with 2 white curators working within Western institutions, and how could we include just more gazes, more perspectives into our process. And I think that today we would probably have gone much more, we've been much more radical in our methods, but at that time it was already a very big step in 2016-17 to sort of, how do you say, hand over the curatorial power of decision to a broader group. I mean, of course, we were still the curators, but, you know, to include so many people in our process was quite a sort of a new thing in both our institutions. And this session turned out to be extremely inspiring, and it was clear to us that this was really a very interesting way to move forward. And some of the people involved there have actually been collaboration partners all along. And Rebecca Habermas is also in this session. We'll speak later today, so she's been with us all along. And so that has also been extremely valuable. And then there was an expert group that was related more specifically to the Stedelijk. It was established slightly later, but so that has been sort of a key take, which was important, you know, when you try to work cross-disciplinary. Yeah, and as Beatrice also said, the crossover to anthropology was also key from the beginning. I mean, there was this Nolde expedition or this expedition to Papua New Guinea that Nolde was part of, and the question of what's going on here? What is the relation between art and anthropology? What would it mean if we try to look at this material from the anthropological perspective? So we actually participated in various conferences, among them also this anthropological conference in London in 2018, where we presented our project, presented some of the works, and got some feedback from people coming from a different discipline.
Yeah, here we just have some of the experts that we talked to. We had an advisory group here in Amsterdam, which there were varying members, but the core group in the end consisted of Wayne Modest and Ron Uwees from the National Museum of World Cultures, Birgit Meijer, who is a professor of religious studies at the University of Utrecht, Anke Tonnaar, lecturer in cultural anthropologist at the Radboud University in Nijmegen, a cultural historian Nancy Jouwe, and the Stedelijks curator at large, Yvette Mutumba. We also had a work group on Papua New Guinea, we'll come to that later, and many other experts that we asked for specific topics because every topic brought with them new questions with it, new questions that we needed external advice on. Then we also looked at lots of exhibitions. Dorte, you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, just very briefly, because we only have 50 minutes. Yeah, I mean, we were so lucky that we started this project before lockdown, and which actually gave the opportunity to travel around and to see exhibitions and to look for best practice examples. And this one, that Africa in 2016, you know, the curator from that one, Michaela Oberhofer from the Museum Riedberg, was part of our conference or our workshop in 2017. So there were people that had already concrete experience with making exhibitions that try to deal with some of the questions we're talking about here, were important conversation partners for us. And it was also clear, here's another important example with Julia Binzer, who's also part of our discussions in 17, an exhibition that had tried to sort of explore the colonial traces in an art collection. So what was also quite clear to us, or became clear to us, was that we had embarked on a project that was really being approached in several countries at the same time. There are many people out there working on this, so it has been a field in movement, as Reinhold also said in the beginning. So it has changed a lot on the way, and we had to navigate in relation to all these very important discussions that were happening around us, which has also been a very unusual experience, to try to sort of enter, and take into considerations new aspects that were coming up around us.
Yeah, part of this process was indeed all the discussions going on in different exhibitions in different parts of Europe, which was really great fun, I have to say, and really very inspiring, because suddenly it seemed like everybody was dealing with colonialism in one way or another, or trying to abolish hierarchies and so on. And so, yeah, we were looking at all these different ways of dealing with these subjects in order to determine how we wanted to do it. This was another example. This one we actually didn't see together, unfortunately. Incarnations, African Artists for Philosophy in Brussels, curated by Kendall Geers. It was really quite amazing in the sense that all the works had been taken off the walls and put in the structure in the middle to put them all on the same hierarchy or same standard. Also, the use of mirrors was included here. And yet in the very beginning of the exhibition, we had maps where the global south was north, actually maps from the 17th century. So this was really made you aware not only of your Eurocentric gaze, but also, how you're used to a certain perspective and take it for granted that this is standard. Then we went to see the exhibition Beyond Compare, Art from Africa in the Body Museum in Berlin. Here, African art and European art from different places were shown together, side by side, which was really very interesting to see. At the same time, of course, you can ask lots of questions, and we were debating, what does it mean if you show these artworks in a Eurocentric way, essentially, or in a European museum. But it was really interesting to see them like that and in a different kind of environment. And of course, there was the big Oceania exhibition in London and Paris, and in a smaller version also in Leiden, where not only art from Oceania was shown as art really, and not as artifacts, but also contemporary artists were invited to reflect on various topics in the exhibition. So you got a different perspective there as well, but a lot will be said about that tomorrow, so I won't go into that. Dorte, you want to take on?
Yes, and then of course, since Kirchner and Nolde were our kind of key protagonists. You know, we needed, of course, to collaborate with the two important collections. So that's the Nolde-Stiftung Sibbel and the Kirchner Museum in Davos. We are very dependent on being able to access archives and so on, and on their just help in the process. And yeah, very grateful for support from both those museums. And also understood that this was, even though it's problematic in many respects and challenging also our understanding of the artworks, they also understood the importance of supporting this project. So we have to move on very fast. I see.
Yeah.
I've got a message that we are running out of time. So we will move on very fast to our two various presentations. So at the SMK, we employed a designer that we've been working with before and told her that we would like her to think of an exhibition that would sort of challenge our conventional art museum aesthetics and think more in terms of ethnographic museums and cultural historical museums, and so adopt that aesthetics. So actually that was what she did. She was using some of the devices we know from those museums, so big blow-ups of documentary photographs, great variety of materials, a kind of collage-like aesthetics with a lot of writing also. So kind of challenging the role of the artwork and also challenging the gaze that is looking for, you know, the aesthetic gaze and the celebration of the artist's work as a masterpiece, while also giving space to it. So it was that sort of balance we were trying to juggle in this exhibition. And as you can see, we have very big vitrines, and that was actually to give the ethnographic artworks some space on their own, to free them from their link to the paintings by Kirchner and Nolde. And on top of these pedestals, we had object histories giving information about a particular object.
Yeah, I'm not going to say a lot about this because I already said quite a bit in the video. But the design is by Afina de Jong, and we had these corridors. And what I didn't mention in the video is the words in the corridors, and how the corridors as a way work as a pause between two themes. And the words are, of course, verbs that have several meanings, but that encourage people to think about particular topics a little bit more. And then the color scheme is important as well, because we actually wanted to avoid a little bit the look of ethnographic museums, which is often kind of brown gray, but also looking at how colonial exhibitions were traditionally exhibited, where you went from dark Africa and then it became lighter until you were at pastel colored Europe. So this idea of enlightenment being brought to the colonies. And so we decided to have, in particular, these rooms where there were objects from outside of Europe to show these in very bright rooms or almost pastel-like colors. Yeah, then we had this discussion about whether or not to exhibit ethnographic artwork. So, I mean, we have several case studies here. I mean, I'm not sure how much time we have still for these, but maybe we can also discuss them in the discussion and go through them very quickly.
Yeah, maybe we can take the two of them here, just to give an idea of some of the differences and discussions we had.
Good idea. Yeah. So one of the discussions, I think I will skip this one and we go to the Benin bronzes. Is that all right?
Yeah. So we can say we had discussions about whether or not to include ethnographic objects from the very beginning, because lack of knowledge, because problematic provenance, because of the framing of putting them into a Western art museum. You know, we found there were so many issues at stake here that it was already problematic from the very beginning. But we ended up, after many discussions, to decide to include ethnographic art and to explore that relation. And with the Benin bronzes, as Beatrice also mentioned in the video, we ended up with different decisions. Of course, it was, we are all very aware that this was very sensitive, particularly sensitive, because it's so well documented how violent the circumstances of the loot was. And it was so evident that these objects should go back to what they came from. So how do you do an exhibition where you risk to sort of continue the violence that has already been happening, you know, also in an institutional context, when you exhibit them again in a Western museum, for a privileged Western audience, and so on and so forth. So, and of course, the option was to find other ways or not to exhibit them. So we decided in Copenhagen that in our context, it was the best decision would be to exhibit them, but only to exhibit 2 of them. We had a longer list in the beginning. They came from the museum in Dresden. We also had long discussions with them about the situation here. And the reasons why we thought it was important in Copenhagen is that we thought for our audiences who would not be so familiar with Benin bronzes, because that discussion has not really happened in the Danish media as it has in Germany and in the Netherlands and in France and elsewhere. It was important to show people that these are fantastic artworks in their own rights, and they should be respected and exhibited and considered on the level of anything else we are presenting in our museum. So it was a way to present our audience with the qualities and significance of the artworks. If you take the next slide, or the previous slide, you can actually see how we organized it, because then the previous one, we decided to keep them, to separate them.
That only goes forward now. I can't go back apparently. Sorry, no, I can't go back now. Don't know why.
But we decided to separate them from the works by Kirchner and Nolde, so that they would not be sort of linked to each other, that it would be possible to look at them on their own terms. Okay, you can see that there. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so they had their own wall, and then we had the reception or response by Kirchner and Nolde on the other side, and in the middle, a video with Energy Ogbebor, who actually produced the artwork that Beatrice the Aesthetic Museum have acquired, included in the show. And he was kind of our contemporary voice, explaining to our audiences, which is mainly a Danish audience, that what this is and why it is important today, or why they're still important today, and why they're missing in Nigeria. And then we had sort of on a shelf under them, there was information about the loot, photographs from the, where they came from. So you can actually both get information about particular artworks. What are we looking at? What are the qualities? What is the special tradition of bronzes in the Kingdom of Benin, and what happened during the loot? And, so that whole story was kind of unfolded on various platforms to give a sort of complex story of what is at stake here. And we actually managed with this, I should say, also to raise a discussion in Denmark. It caused a lot of attention, and also people were very touched to experience these artworks. So, I mean, in that respect, it was we obtained what we wanted to with them.
Yes, I don't think I need to explain what we did here, because I already did it in the video, basically. So I think can probably move forward. Here's Energy Ogbebor with his mask. Yeah, another case was really how to exhibit the material relating to colonial exhibitions. Daughter, would you like to say something about it?
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, of course, we are dealing with highly sensitive material. I mean, these photographs you also discussed before are taken of people that are exhibited, sometimes against their will. We don't know under which circumstances the photographs are taken. By exhibiting them in our museum, we are exhibiting them again. So we are continuing that sort of violation. So what to do, and how do we speak about these human exhibitions altogether? And so what we did was we kind of we decided to approach it to be as specific as possible. So never just to speak generally about human exhibitions, but to talk about the specific events and to try to dig into the material, finding material relating to the specific exhibitions that the artists studied, so that we're not, you know, and trying to understand who were the people and what is the story of those people. And all photographic material were actually presented in, you know, horizontally in these vitrines, and never used as blow up. We didn't use blow up of naked people, and so we all the blow ups we are using, we actually had a long discussion about what would be the issues here and what can we not exhibit, and very few examples. In very few cases we included sort of colonial photos as blow-ups, but we found it difficult to sort of explain what is the visual culture, you know, surrounding these exhibitions, which the artists were also responding to without including material. So it was all about finding ways to present in a thoughtful way, you know, being aware of what you're actually doing when you're putting it forward. And here you can see how we actually really confronting Kirchner's painting with the visual culture that is related to the human exhibitions, which was very provoking for some audiences. They felt it was very reinforcing the context upon the works.
Yeah, we got the same reproach in some cases. This was also something that was really much debated in the advisory group, and it was really quite difficult. And I've explained it already in the video, why we decided this, to have these large photographs looking back at us. But the question remains, of course, unresolved to some extent, I suppose, whether it's material that you should or should not expose, because you do want to show why the artists looked at this and what were their, what is classically called sources of inspiration. But basically, you know, what were they looking at, and how did they depict it? How did they change it? Because of course, it's like this dances. I mean, there were no naked dances at that time in these shows. This is really the imagination of the artist. And so, I mean, that alone says something about this kind of fantasy of women from outside of Europe being kind of erotically available, I suppose. Also, of course, when you look at this publicity material, it's very, there's a lot of stereotypes there, and in a way, these artists, I suppose, largely unwittingly repeat these stereotypes, and I think that's important to show this. We didn't focus on specific shows here, but really on individual people and their stories, because the shows, they really threw together all kinds of different people from different origins, sometimes in one show. Although we do mention, of course, in the text as well, which were the places that and the shows that these artists visited.
Yeah, I think we could go on, but maybe we should just stop here.
Yeah,
and leave the floor to the next speaker.
Yeah, there's so much more to discuss. I mean, This was such a lengthy process. To sum it up in just 20 minutes is quite a challenge. But I'm sure points will come up also in the discussion. I'll just go through this quickly. Papua New Guinea is something that has already also partly been discussed, and maybe will come up in the discussion as well. So yeah, I think it's good to go on to the next participant and then have more come up in the discussion.
Thank you for that, and yes, absolutely appreciate that you have such a wealth of material, and that the careful thinking that went into each composition. Possibly that is definitely something we could bring out in the discussion. But I would like to ask Elena Scholl, who's a curator of collections at the Bricker Museum, And I believe she's brought Anna Bruce with her, who works at the Kunsthistorische Institute at the University of Cologne. And they will speak about the making of their exhibition at the Brücke Museum. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand over to Elena and Anna.
Thank you. I'm going to try to share my screen as well. So maybe you could give me some feedback if you can see when I switch the
yes, all good.
Yes, you
That's
can
all
see
good.
perfect.
You're good to go. Yeah.
After after the last presentations, I wasn't quite sure if this would work out well or not. Of course, our exhibition is not called Whose Expression, That's a typo. You can tell that we're in crunch time. Our opening is on the 17th of December. So yeah, basically the last few weeks and the following weeks are still a lot of work. A lot of things are happening. I cannot give a talk about our exhibition as extensive as Dot and Beatrice did, because there's still so much in the process, but I've gathered a quick presentation to give some of the information. Our project is very much based on Dot and Beatrice's Kirchner Nolde exhibition, and we took a lot of their research, their discussions, and participated in those. And but since we are the Brücke Museum, since we are dedicated to all of the artists, for us it was very clear in the beginning that in our venue we don't only want to show Kirchner Nolde, but for us it's really important to look at our own collection in all, at our own colonial heritage. And that's also why we broadened and extended the concept a bit, while at the same time condensing a bit of all of the information that is on view in Amsterdam and Copenhagen, since our museum is way smaller. I'm giving a tiny insight. The museum was actually initiated by one of the Brücke members, Karl Schmidt-Rottluff, and is based in the western part of Berlin. It's a bungalow museum type, which is quite different to like the grand museum buildings in Copenhagen and in Amsterdam. So it's more like you can see also in a view from one of our past exhibitions that for Schmidt-Rottluff and the architect back then, it was very important to build the museum more like a living room type, to have a very like low level entrance to present, to build the whole building around expressionist art. So that's one of the main things. And you've mentioned earlier, I'm not the only one that I took with me to the panel. Anna Bruce is accompanying me and is giving some information later, because we have different projects actually about our own colonial heritage at the museum. But we too are like the faces now of a whole curatorial team. As I said, like we had a lot of discussions, of course, with Beatrice and Dorte, but also within our own institution. And the exhibition at our place is very much a team effort. Also, the director of the museum, Lisa Marei Schmidt, is one of the curators. Daniela Bistron, our curator of outreach, is part of the team. And then we also invited with Anna and with Aya Soika and Sol Izquierdo de la Viña, two curators from outside who are experts on some of the different fields of the exhibitions to contribute with their knowledge. And we had a lot of similar discussions, which also surround a bit of the topic: how do you present the different material? How is it possible, for example, to have a shift of perspective? And what we were very much drawn to were the critical voices interviews that were produced by the Stedelijk and the Statens Museum. And we wanted to give those voices a big part of our exhibition, to actually like include them very much also into our graphics, and not have a very typical and classical art exhibition, but to break this art exhibition style up in many different aspects, to have contemporary inputs by the voices. We also invited Yvette Mutumba and Julia Grosse to include their Center of Unfinished Business, which is sort of like a walk-in library, which will be part of our exhibition installation, where there are a lot of books from our own library, but also books that they contribute that are questioning the typical museum canonization processes and the forming of our knowledge on colonialism. We were talking also a lot about how to present problematic image material, and some of the discussions are still ongoing. One, for example, is to break up a bit the traditional showing all of the art at eye level, but maybe raising some of the artworks a bit higher, and not having like the typical museum spotlight hitting them, making them, elevating them, and having them in a sort of like orated sense. First, we wanted to put everything closer down to the floor, which out of like not conversational reasons, for conservative reasons is not possible, of course, but we also thought about like having those very exoticizing image material from the entertainment culture, but also in other parts of the exhibition, that we don't want to show them just as they're colorful images that people that walk through the exhibition without reading much of the texts don't have the feeling like, oh, that's like a colorful picture and I'm drawn to it, but we are going to put some of the images on a Teilwerk, which is has a silver shimmery feeling, so you cannot really view some of the images, like you can even view them less than is visible here in this screenshot from a draft of our exhibition design. And we are including another interview here in that section as well, who that is contextualizing also the entertainment industry back then and the colonial exhibitions. We have the advantage from a disadvantage, since we have less space with us, of course. So, and as a third venue, also, we don't have all of the loans that our prior cooperation partners had. We don't have the artworks that actually show like the Sudanese exhibitions or exhibits. So therefore, we also decided a lot that our contribute can be that we have a very good exhibition going on right now in the Museum Treptow about the first colonial exhibition that was here in Berlin. Yeah, we are linking to that exhibition because that is very, very well researched also on the biographies of the people that participated, their stories, and also their resistance stories, which was quite important to us. And one of the interesting things that we're still also discussing is that for us, the project is very much a point of departure, and exhibitions usually are the end of the story. Like you research for years and years, and then you present all of your results, and that's it. But for us, since we have a close connection to colonialism in a sense, because Carl Schmidt-Rottluff, who I mentioned, initiated the museum, but we also house his artist estate, and his artist estate includes more than 100 sculptures, objects, and artifacts from more than 20 regions all over the world. And this collection has not been documented by him, and we know very little about the provenance and how it came together and everything. So and it's also part, like our museum team right now, we have a very young team that came together like in the last few years. Like there was a shift in generations basically in our museum. And for us, it was very important to look how to change also a bit of the structures of our museum, how to find out more about that collection, how to diversify our own team, our own knowledge, but that is very much a process. And this sort of process is something that we wanted to also show in the text of the exhibition. So one of the things is that we will have a glossary that you can take with you that go into detail with a few more concepts like, oh, sorry, that was too fast, like imperialism or the white gaze or something like that. And then we will have sort of similar to like Word documents where you're actually still working in and commenting. We will have some of the information like an outside comment into it. So there's a lot of, or we are trying a lot of different things out. For example, also inverting some of the problematic terms that are still very much used in art history, like basically the reception of, or the context of colonialism so far in art history has always been called primitivism, which itself is such a problematic term, and there's still so much need to discuss this and change this and everything. So a lot of like those problematic terms, exoticism, Orientalism, or some of that are inverted. And so basically when you're reading the text, you're halted to have a look or think about those terms, and to maybe even question your own language, because language is so much part of history and contributes so much to current day racism and everything, and stereotypes and everything. So that was something that we were discussing and dealing with. But there are also a lot of different projects within our own team that we had an InReach project, for example, where, like I mentioned, we are looking at how to diversify our own team, how to make the whole museum more accessible to to the general public, to invite very many different visitors. And that's actually something that I find very interesting. The critiques that were mentioned in Copenhagen and in Amsterdam. I'm very much looking forward to seeing the critiques we're getting here in Berlin, because of course, we as Germans, it's our colonial history that we're talking about. And it's something that is still very current also in discussions here with the Benin Francis, with restitution, with acknowledging the genocide and all of that. There's been so many different debates, and I think that, yeah, of course, we're not going to do everything right, but because I'm being told that I'm already also at the end of my allocated time, I want to quickly give the word to Anna Bruce also, because she is working on digitizing the whole collection and researching the collection of Karl Schmidt-Rottluff, which we're putting on Wiki Commons.
Hello, everybody. So thank you for including me in this conversation. Maybe, Elena, you could share your screen and I could share mine. So I came very late to this game. I just heard like 30 minutes before the start that I have to present something, and I have to excuse myself because I only have something here in German, which I will share. But it seems to be not possible. Just a second. So I promise I will keep it very short. Okay, but I cannot, for some reasons, the screen sharing is different than it's usually. Basic. No. Okay, so maybe I try it like this. Ah, yeah, here it is. Okay, so sorry that this is in German. The Brücke Museum houses this collection by Karl Schmidt-Rottluff, this collection of orphaned objects, of about 100 objects produced in various different regions, in 20 different regions. And it's not a spectacular collection. It's not like the collection that you've seen before, the collection by Nolde in Seebühl. These are mostly small items, a few masks, boxes, everyday items like spoons and all sorts of vessels. So what you see here is the collection before a part of it was burned in Karl Schmidt-Rottluff's apartment, and I think in 1944 during the World War, parts of his collections burned in his atelier in Berlin, and so they were not safe in Europe. This collection is, a kind of misfit collection, and I very often see people being very disappointed when they see the collection, because, as I said, it's not a spectacular collection, and a lot of objects were quite obviously also made for a Western market. So this is a kind of misfit collection, and it also shows how very modern these collections are, and how wrong the Brücke artists were with their idea of an Ursprung, of the authentic, the original, and people without history, because it very much reflects also exchange and colonialism. The collection also reflects the German colonial empire. So we have a lot of objects from Cameroon, very few from Namibia, and also a lot of objects from Papua New Guinea. So, just give me a second. This is home office. I'm very sorry. So now we started to do conversational work on it and to have them photographed. So here you see the digitization process, and the idea was to give up the interpretive authority of the museum and publish them on Wikimedia. So it's a process to make them transparent and also to give people ideally the opportunity to be part of this conversation about the objects, and also with the hope that that maybe the colonial conventions that the objects are embedded in, the baggage of colonial language, could be rewritten or could be dissolved if other people also get involved. And the question was also that, or the question was, how can we address people for whom these objects might be of importance? How can we get into a kind of transcultural dialogue about it, and how can we find a kind of multi-layered meaning making surrounding these objects? And all this within a few months. So therefore I had several conversations with decolonial activists, with diasporic artists, with also reaching out to the so-called source communities. I involved museums, or reached out to museums in, for example, in Papua New Guinea, the Comeback Museum, the Iziko Museum in South Africa, and museum in Cameroon, and so on. Yes, to get help to redress also the colonial language, and to find a way of reconnecting these objects with places or with peoples that could make meaning beyond the conventional Brücke Museum audience. So, and what surprised me is that many of my conversation partners were not at all interested in the objects themselves, but rather in speaking about the violence of museum epistemics, about the lies that the colonial archives tells and goes on telling in exhibitions to this day, about how people feel misrepresented in exhibitions also through such objects, and then of course also about the loss of memory that can come along with the loss of material culture. And of course restitution was a topic. So, and all this is not very easily to be put in a Wikimedia page. So it's still a process where we try to find out how what to make with these findings. So I wouldn't want to unlink the project from the rest of the work in the Brücke Museum, and it is also not unlinked because we have a second exhibition that has not been mentioned yet. We have an exhibition in the neighboring museum, in the Dala Museum, that is called Transition Exhibition, and by Paz Guevara. And it will show these objects and contemporary artists trying to bring new life and voice to these objects, using music, using also the interviews that I collected, and also reflecting the way these kind of artworks always have been exhibited, and trying to break it up and find new forms. So what else? I mean, I hope that this this project that we follow is not made in this kind of add-up strategy that has been mentioned before, but that it really also helps us to transform the way we think about the Brücke artists, the way we think about how objects are put in the ethnography category, how we stage them, how we show them, and yes, think in general about this ethics of seeing and showing. So I will end here and stop my screen.
There we go. Thank you so much, Anna. And I think it's interesting that you brought us also to think about what's happening behind the scenes, behind the exhibition, and how knowledge has already started to be constructed in those spaces and possible ways we might start breaking some of those categories open. So thank you for that. I would also like to mention that you've heard some discussion already or between panelists. So if you wanted to, as audience members, pose questions in the Q&A section, please, you can start putting your questions down, especially if you've got something burning already from what you've heard. Before you forget, please put it in the Q&A. Our next speaker is Rebecca Habermas. Professor Rebecca Habermas is a professor of modern history at the University of Göttingen. And Professor Habermas, I believe you will be speaking on some of the issues that has been raised in these exhibitions, which I think is it's a good kind of stepping back perspectives and maybe looking at some of the things as they occur across all these various instantiations. So with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Professor Habermas. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Just a minute. Bildschirm zeigen. Jetzt gehe ich einfach wieder oben weiter. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much for the invitation. I'm just try to be very brief. I was asking myself, what does it mean to exhibit Nalde and Kirchner in 2021? And how is this realized in the exhibition we have now in the Netherlands? The first question I just wanted to ask myself is, what is colonialism? Because this is one of the first exhibitions of the last years, which is addressing the question of colonialism and art very, very clearly, and not just en passant. And therefore, it's important to ask, what is colonialism? And this is a view from a colonial historian. And I was very much, I liked the exhibition in the Netherlands very much because this exhibition addressed the question of how colonialism and modern art depend on each other openly, loud, and with an otherwise unknown directness, as far as I see, compared to the exhibitions we had in Bremen, or we had in Hamburg, or we had even in Paris, where this was this exhibition on Picasso. And this directness, as I want to say, is more than appropriate when it comes to Nalde, and Nalde is the only one I really know something about. Because Nalde's picture production originated out of a colonial enterprise. And to put it the other way around, no single sketch would have been drawn without the colonial office. I think this is very, very important to know. He joined an expedition financed and organized by the German colonial office, directed by 2 medical experts, which tried, these experts, these medical experts, tried to solve a really severe colonial problem because they supposed that the lack of local workforce wanting to work on European plantations was a question of particular weak bodies, and was not a question that the people didn't want to work for the Germans or the English or the French, but it was a medical question. And this was the expedition he was joining, and this was a perspective he was somehow trained into. this is, I think, important to know. And this was this background for asking how now is this colonialism exhibited concerning Nalde and this expedition. And I was wondering, what do I find in the exhibition about, about colonialism? And I was, I mean, we just have to remember what is colonialism, and there are just some notions. Everybody knows that this is colonialism. And I was walking through the pictures I got from the exhibition. I haven't been there, and I was wondering what is shown about the colonialism as I know it as an historian. And I saw that there's a lot shown about the context, colonialism as a context story, and it is a context story, that's for sure. But it is as well shown a lot what Europe owes to the non-European world. I mean, all these artifacts in some way owes Europe from the non-European world. And there's also some narratives about the agency of the local population. This is as well shown. But colonialism is also about the colonizers. And I was looking for the colonizers in this exhibition. And there are some colonizers to be seen. You see these colonizers in front of the church. But as I would argue, there's something missing about colonialism. And what is missing about colonialism is that it is the side which we all know, it's the side of suffering and exploitation. I don't want to argue that colonization or colonial history is only about suffering and exploitation. There's also a contact and exchange, and one really has to take that into account. But colonialism is also a story of suffering and violent colonizers, of racial thinking and economic exploitation. And this story is ugly, and it is very sad. And it perhaps needs another aesthetic. I think it perhaps needs an aesthetic of ugliness and at the same time of grief. And that was I was looking for in the exhibitions. That means an aesthetic of museum representation, not easy to develop, but I think it is needed. And I think it is needed at least when we want to follow Dipesh Chakrabarty's plea that museums should be, and here I quote what Dipesh Chakrabarty wrote, museums should be key sites for cultural politics arising over questions of the past in late democracies. That's a very, very important task. Key sites for cultural politics arising over questions of the past in late democracies. A task, I think, as important as difficult to fulfill. And therefore, I think I come back to the introductory section just at the beginning of our conversation, where one was wondering about how museums have to change. And I think if we really take it seriously, the encounter of the painters with the non-European world in colonial times, the colonialism in some way has to be more present, and therefore it has to be more ugly, and it has to be more about grief. This was my impressions about the exhibition Nalde and Kirche in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Habermas. I think what's productive about that is to think about the kinds of visual languages and what they gravitate our thoughts to, and maybe drawing attention to depictions that are absent, that might have also, that informs also an understanding of this context. I'm very happy for that contribution. Thank you. Our last speaker in the session is Maite van Dijk. Maite recently started as artistic director of the museum MORE, M-O-R-E, in Gorsel. But until 2021, she was a senior curator of paintings by Vincent van Gogh's contemporaries at the Van Gogh Museum, where we also have the Van Gogh in Laval exhibition, which I believe you're going to speak to for us, as well as a kind of an intertext of the exhibition under discussion today. With that, Maite, please go ahead.
Thank you, Karina. Thank you to everyone. I hope I am visible now and you can hear me, because I don't see anything.
We can hear you. We can hear you well. You're
good,
visible.
good.
Thank you.
Slight correction. It was the exhibition about Gauguin at Laval.
I'm sorry. My
Van Gogh. That's okay. Everyone thinks it's all about Van Gogh at the Van Gogh Museum, but there are so many more to see. It is an exhibition we did a few years ago, so I have to take you back into time, and myself as well. As you mentioned, I've moved on to a different institution. I will share my screen so that I can show you some images. Start. The exhibition was held at the Van Gogh Museum, so the neighbors of the Stedelijk Museum, in 2018. And I'm going to tell you a bit about it as a kind of other example of two French artists, in this case, going to a colony at that time from France. And Beatrice asked me if I could tell a little bit about the making of the exhibition and how it all began. It was very different, our starting point, than the Kirchner and Nolde exhibition, I believe. It started out very art historical. We have several paintings and some drawings in, well, the Van Gogh Museum has several paintings and drawings in their collection from Paul Gauguin and Charles Laval, two French artists that were living in Paris at the time and who decided to travel together to Martinique, which was then a French colony. And upon their return, the Van Gogh brothers acquired this beautiful painting by Paul Gauguin and also works by Laval later on. And our researcher, Joost van der Hoeve, questioned, why there had never been any research done nor an exhibition organized about this trip. If we talk about Gauguin, it's mostly about his Tahiti period. Well, he said himself in one of his letters that the Martinique trip was decisive in his artistic process. So we decided to dig in, to try to find out more about this trip that the two artists made together. And it was really, we started out with a lot of art historical questions, very practical ones as well, like how did they take their materials, how many paintings and drawings did they make, how can we describe their artistic collaboration. And we started with an expert meeting with Gauguin scholars only, all art historians and restorers, conservation specialists, which you see here. Unfortunately, there's not a real Laval expert because everyone's always focusing on Gauguin. And that was also something we tried to change with our exhibition, to bring back to the fore an artist who has been largely forgotten. Our approach changed a little bit, or changed drastically, I have to say, when we traveled to Martinique, Joost and I. Here you see us on the island. And that was, of course, very naive. But before our trip to Martinique, we were so concerned with all these more artistic questions that we really hadn't discussed the colonial context yet so far. We were also trying to trace many of these artworks. The Van Gogh Museum holds a few objects from this trip, but there are many more paintings and drawings, and they have been scattered all over the world in private collections. So mounting this exhibition was also very much trying to trace all these works and to bring them back together for the first time. So we basically didn't have much time to consider other questions. But when we were in Martinique, and here you see us trying to figure out the locations from where Gauguin and Laval painted, we knew whereabout they were located, more or less. And some of the locations had already been located exactly, but not all of them. So being on the island, our main task was to find out where and how they painted. But of course, other questions became also very relevant, and even maybe more relevant is what did they paint and what did they not paint? Which choices did they make? Who were the people they painted? What was trying to figure out their perspective in relation to the actual island. Here you see one of the locations that we've traced. You see the volcano in the back, but you also see a very wrecked car in the front. There was a lot of, well, ugliness here, and it was actually one of the moments that Joost and I asked ourselves, wow, there's so much that, well, we see now, and of course the island has changed, but there's also so much ugliness next to the beauty and especially the vegetation that is so prominent in Gauguin's work. And there must have been a lot of ugliness in the 19th century as well, of course, that has been left out. So what are the stories that are not being told in their paintings became one of the questions we asked ourselves. Here is another painting by Laval that we were able to locate on the island, the location where it was painted. We were also very much concerned with the relation between the paintings and the drawings, the sketches. And as I said, there's never been any exhibition on this trip, and also not much research. So it was really for the first time that we were able to bring these works together, and which also has been the focus of our exhibition. I will show you some images of the design in a few moments. And I think that has also been important in how the exhibition was perceived by the public and the critics, which is one of the questions, of course, of the symposium today. So here I will show you some of the images from the exhibition. As I mentioned, it's already a few years ago. You see here that they traveled through Panama, which was actually their first destination, but on the way to Panama, they stopped on Martinique. And the situation in Panama was not as idyllic as they hoped for when they departed from France. So they decided to go back to Martinique instead, and to have their painterly stay in Martinique. Here you see the entrance of the exhibition with 19th century photos of Martinique. And then the main focus is on the artworks and on the series. And we also try to establish a chronology and to bring the works by Laval and Gauguin next to each other again. Here are all the paintings with a few drawings on the wall, and you see here that we also installed these glass walls to have all these sketches and studies, which were actually from, most of them at least, from different drawing cahiers that were taken apart in the early 20th century. And so all the sketches are now dispersed with different private collectors and some museums and other institutions throughout the world. And we were able for the first time to really have this connection between the paintings and the drawings, and also to have both sides of the drawings visible to the public. You also see here in the middle audiophones through which the audience could listen to fragments of the letters by Laval and Gauguin, which they sent from Martinique. Here, and it was really a focused exhibition. It was one floor only, so just one gallery, so that you could really zoom into this specific period. We did add, in the end, some objects that they made after their return to Paris. Especially Gauguin was very prolific after his return to Paris. I mean, he made a lot of sculptures as well, wooden objects. They were not only inspired by his trip to Martinique, but also by the world exhibitions. And you see, and I think that's interesting because you see the same thing happening, I think, with in the exhibition Kirchner and Nolde, that when he's back in Paris, his imagery becomes much more explicit and maybe also much more racist in a way, and also combining different cultural imagery that doesn't fit together based on all these kinds of things that he saw in the world exhibitions. And to conclude, we added in the top floor of the exhibition wing a presentation with the French artists, well, actually the artist from Martinique, but now living in Paris, Jean-François Beauclerc. And he made an installation called Caribbean Hurricane, in which he reflects on the colonial history and also on how the Caribbean reality is, still very much influenced by its past. And he made an installation, and unfortunately I don't have video, but then you would have heard the sound as well, the wind of these fans going and blowing, with all the colors of the colonial countries and the main products. It was that they the crops that they took from Martinique, such as bananas, and which is still a very large part of the export of Martinique, combined in this installation. Here you see again an overview of the exhibition gallery. But during the making of the exhibition, we realized that we were so focused on all these more artistic and historical questions about the works themselves, that there wasn't much space left in the exhibition to address the colonial situation. Of course, we did address it in our texts, and we added the contemporary installation to reflect upon it from a contemporary angle. But we also organized Friday evening events together with our education department called Wrong Connected, in which we explored these colonial issues about race, about color, about identity, with a young group of Amsterdam visitors. There were 3 evenings, and there was a lot of time to discuss and to visit the exhibition together. One of the sessions we did was also about the titles of exhibitions. And I wanted to show you this artwork, which was called by Gauguin himself. It was made after his trip to Martinique, and it's called Négrerie Martinique. So what we did during one of these evenings was we hit all the titles of artworks and asked the group to come up with new titles, and then we discussed the actual titles of the artworks. And it was very interesting to see what titles they invented for the artworks. And one of the main issues that came to the fore was the fact that the visitors really missed stories of the people, of the protagonists on these artworks. And unfortunately, we don't know anything about the models that Gauguin and Laval used. They're not explicit about them in their letters. They're not really much of interest to them as persons, but just as artistic models. But that was one of the main points that the public made, was that they really missed more information about who these people were. And what their daily lives were about. Well, this is a watercolor by Laval, which also raises a lot of questions, of course. I really like the comment that every exhibition is a failure. It was also something that Joost and I felt before the exhibition even opened, that, well, it's maybe harsh to say, but that it could only be a failure because there were so many questions still to be addressed. And that's why we decided to make a book, of course, an exhibition catalog. You can see it here. But that we also really wanted to use the exhibition as a research platform and to bring back together a group of experts, and now not only art historians and conservation technicians, but also to bring in people from a more social historical context, to include scholars from Martinique, from the Caribbean, and to have a much broader perspective on this topic. And to make, after the exhibition, another book, because for us it was really the first opportunity to study the material in person, and together with this group of people. And we decided to make a catalog for the public, but also to prepare a scholarly volume that we are still preparing, actually, which is supposed to be published next year, I think. I have here summarized the outline of the catalog, but you can see that there will be much more historical, economical, social, and cultural aspects included, and also more interpretations about the male gaze, and also, of course, the European gaze. I wanted to say a few words about the press, because that's also something that we've been discussing, of course, in relation to Kirchner and Nolde. I think because our focus in the exhibition was so much on the artworks, and less on the social historical context, is that there was also picked up by the press. Most of the reviews we received were more about the fact that Martinique was actually much more important in the development of Gauguin's career than thought so far, especially in relation to Tahiti. This is a clipping from the New York Times, for example. But there were also newspapers writing about the colonial side. The NRC here writes, this is the headline, that we're showing the colonial gaze in the art. And I wanted to highlight two critiques that we got. The one negative that you see here, and the next one more positive, is in how we did well or not well in presenting this topic. Alexander Adams here wrote that we were wrong about putting it in relation to gender and colonialism. And he also writes that we as art historians should usually keep ourselves far away from these political agendas. And I think it's very telling to read this also in relation to this reaction in a review in the Süddeutsche Zeitung, where they say that we have managed to keep the right balance between the art historical angle and a more critical or cultural historical perspective. And what I realized is that they both speak about balance, and apparently there is a right balance or a supposed balance. And I was wondering who decides what that balance should be. And I think that really dominates now as well the critiques on Kirchner and Nolde. And that was what I wanted to say about Gauguin and Laval. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maite. That was very interesting. And I like the questions that you also raised towards the end of your presentation. And I think that can take us into the discussion. I would like to invite the presenters, if you want, to come back and turn your videos on if you want, and your microphones. That's wonderful, thank you. We have about 15 minutes or so for discussion. We have one question from the audience, which I do want us to get to. But as we were talking, as everybody was talking now, I started to think about the ways in which the various curators imagined which audience or who the audience was for these exhibitions. And some of the reasons I'm wondering about this is that these exhibitions that you have referenced are staged in Europe. They dealt with European artists and they links to colonialism. And in various cases, I think notions of new insights or new perspectives were raised that some of the exhibitions responded to. But you know, thinking if these exhibitions were staged in places outside Europe, so for example, in South Africa, there are some of these insights that would already be present in those spaces. So they would already be, that would be the kinds of knowledges that audiences would come at to these exhibitions already. And I think, Maite, you brought some of that in also with the exercises you did with your audience, thinking about ways in which, you know, just kind of reframing who might have authority to speak about these artworks, and what kinds of knowledge is being drawn on with this. So I was curious to understand. I see Anna, you have your hand up, so I'm going to ask you, curious to understand maybe what conception of audience is at play across these various exhibitions. Anna, do you want to go?
Sorry, this was a question to me right now. I was just thinking of my question, so sorry.
Okay.
This right now, I was just translating.
I see. Does anybody want to speak to audience? Maybe Doortje?
Yeah, it is definitely something we have been aware of. More aware than we normally have or have been before, I would say. In fact, we also had a process with some of our guides, which is a more diverse group, which is a diverse group. Also people with other, you know, from other ethnic backgrounds and so on. And there were some very strong reactions to the exhibition. Actually, that was before it opened to the audience. Which, I mean, we knew that there were, could be things that would provoke very sort of emotional reactions, and which was more personal for some people than others. But I mean, it became very clear that there was an issue there that we had to take into consideration. And it was not an easy exhibition, I would say, to do. When it was in Copenhagen, it was not easy because it was provoking a lot of reactions from audiences. And so it was, I mean, one thing is to be the curator that does guided tours. Another thing is to be, you know, the group of guides that have to sort of try to represent the considerations from the institution and go into that conversation with people. But maybe, Mette, would you like to, my colleague in Copenhagen has been very involved in that, maybe would like to add to this? She's still here? Or she left, I think. Anna, would you like to say something?
Sorry, I need to get this to work. No, I don't think I have something right now. Sorry.
I see Beatrice has her hand up. Beatrice, do you want to come in on this point, or do you want to pose something different?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think that as far as I can see now, I mean, I don't have a complete overview yet, but this exhibition here has really attracted also different audience. I mean, we get the traditional audience that we get for exhibitions of modern art, which is usually a little bit older, but we also get a young audience, a lot more than normally, and also more diverse, which is really nice to see. And the reactions are equally mixed, I would say. I mean, there are some people who are really very interested and take a lot of time going through the exhibition, but also some visitors have overheard others making racist comments. So there are also people who react strongly in that sense. So there are definitely strong emotions on both sides, I would say. And it's good that there is discussion. I mean, I've heard that there are people going into discussion with each other in the exhibition. So, I mean, that's of course exactly what you want, and it provokes these kind of discussions. So yeah, in that sense, I think it's good. I would also like to actually answer Rebecca Habermas, if that's all right.
Yeah, please.
What she said about modes of representation, because this is something we have, of course, discussed a lot with our exhibition designer. And I find it really interesting that you say that you think it needs another aesthetic. It is something we have been discussing, but in our exhibition designer, Feiner de Jong, who's also done the slavery exhibition in the Rijksmuseum, by the way, she felt also that there shouldn't be too much focus on the ugliness and grief, in fact, but more on the agency of people. And yeah, making the point that really these countries in Africa and Oceania, the history is not only about colonialism, although in this case, of course, it is, but the point is that also these people and places existed, of course, before, during, and after, and we wanted to celebrate them, as it were. So that was the idea behind it, although, of course, one could make a completely different decision. I can see that. It is just really one way of doing it. And I think that the suffering is visible in some of the photographs, in fact, which at least I myself find quite confronting. I mean, this photograph of this man on the plantation that you showed in your presentation as well. And also, for example, a photograph taken by Ada Nolde of a man probably from Buka Island who is being blackbirded, as was called, was being transported to work on a plantation or as a policeman or to work as what was called houseboys. So I think there are images of suffering there, but we try to also accentuate this aspect of agency.
Thank you. Professor Habermas, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, just one word. Because I'm the guy who always says colonialism is about much more than suffering, because I do think colonialism is about much more than that. But when I saw these pictures and I visited some exhibitions, I always thought, well, the museums as such are so beautiful, and the pictures are so beautiful, and the colors are so beautiful. And therefore, I don't know how to, I don't think colonialism is only about suffering. No, but I think, yeah, one should somehow point out to this aspect as well, because museums are so beautiful places. I mean, you know, there is such a tension between these bourgeois, beautiful, I love museums, you know, but you have to somehow give a counterpoint. This was just, yeah, that's all I want to say.
A powerful point, well made, thank you. Dortje, and then we've also got Nicholas and Elena, so, but I'm going to start with Dortje.
Yeah, no, I mean, we actually did try in the Copenhagen version of the show to go into that. We had a room which we actually skipped it because we were running short of time in our PowerPoint presentation now, but we did have a room about physical anthropology, sort of a black room with a kind of very chaotic aesthetics, with all kinds of material mixed, including instruments for measuring human bodies and photographs of people being measured, which were kind of actually one of the topics we've been discussing with the Stedelijk team and with the group of advisors, because it is, of course, invoking a lot of violence. It is very violent to look at. And so it was one of the sensitive issues that we had to tackle. And we actually decided that this discomfort is necessary because it's part of the topic. I mean, you can't just eliminate discomfort. But of course, you can ask yourself, for whose sake? And what about people that actually have experienced this on their own bodies and it's part of their own history? Does it do any good for them? Is it only a process of acknowledgement for people who haven't thought about this before and who are in the privileged position? You know, so that brings us back to the question of audience. Who are we actually doing it for?
Yeah, absolutely. Nicholas.
I'd just like to thank everyone. I mean, incredibly rich set of discussions, a lot of really intractable issues, which we could talk about for very much longer. I just wanted to signal a sort of disquiet. I mean, in the sense that given that modernism, modernity are key themes, I sort of worry that people can walk through these kinds of exhibitions without necessarily understanding that works like the New Island Mulligan are modern works. I mean, are fundamentally expressions of Melanesian New Island contemporary culture in that period. Those genres didn't exist in the form in which we witness them via museum exhibitions, even probably decades before those works were collected. But is it sort of unavoidable that we look at that kind of display and think that the European works are the expressions of modernity, when in fact many of the indigenous works that are created in the context of transactions or are sort of innovative forms that relate to earlier periods of contact, those are not necessarily evident from people's encounters with the objects themselves. And I felt that one of the key issues that sort of surfaced from time to time has been the specificity of work that is done, as it were, in the field on the site of the encounter. As Rebecca was just sort of saying, I mean, colonialism is many things, and one of the very specific contexts is the colonialism in practice in a particular moment, in a particular place, in a particular time. Erna was talking about how the portrait of the two Manus men, you know, was offensive. I was wondering how, well, actually, if she's felt the same way about all of those watercolors, do those works from the field, so to speak, sort of take us to place, time, people? Do they have different kinds of qualities and values? Are they, you know, ways of accessing local agency in any sense? So I'm sorry, there are probably several rather confused kind of comments, but I guess the core issue is how can exhibitions of this kind help us recognize and interpret local agency, as well as the colonial intrusion, the colonial imagination, how all of this contributed to that culture of empire.
Thank you, Nicholas. I think that was a wonderful set of questions. And I think one of the key things that you've pointed out are the different ways in which objects are interpolated in an ethnographic museum versus how they are interpolated in an art museum. And when the objects that a particular audience is used to seeing in an ethnographic museum is brought into the art museum, then it can't help but drag some of that baggage of the ethnographic museum into that display as well, and that there's something in that shaping of the perspective that is retained even in these kinds of exhibitions. So I think that's, now how does one trouble that? How does one struggles against some of that? So I want to also ask, I see Elena and Anna have their hands up. So if you could, both of you very quickly, maybe say something, and then I want to give some chance also for people to respond. And then we have one or two questions from the audience, which I would like to get to some of that as well. Thank you.
Yes, sure. I think I actually wanted to say that it's quite interesting to see all of the 3 exhibitions because the topic is so similar, but all of them are trying out different ways of curating that topic and of handling actually that sort of colonial baggage that is in those exhibitions, and that are also like experimenting in a way and questioning typical exhibition designs, exhibition views. So I think probably there's not like one right solution, but there's also like different ideas coming together and experimenting with that over time and further developing that over time, and also questioning like the museum standard of being the expert, of being presenting the final product and having all of the knowledge. I think museums should be way more open places that take in the discussion, that are not afraid of having critiques on the way they do it, and that don't always try to exhibit art just through the lens of some sort of aesthetic, but our what we have to do, how we have to work, has to change in that way. Like we have to be more fluent in that, and maybe also making the process of exhibiting and our discussions, our thoughts, our different ideas, making that visible, that we had that certain problems in the different areas. And I think that's.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Anna very quickly. You can.
Yes. Maybe it's going into a similar direction, and I really liked Rebecca Habermas' suggestion to also see the ugliness of the colonial project, and I also want to go back to what was said in the beginning, the complaints by the press that people cannot enjoy the paintings by Kirchner and Nolde anymore, and so on. And I think what hovers above this is the idea of autonomous art, also of art that can be enjoyed as such and without context. And in a way, it seems to me like doing this exhibition is like circling the square, like, you know, showing these artworks that most of us think are beautiful, and at the same time trying to speak about the dark side of it. And I was also wondering why it is so naturalized that we have to always enjoy art, and that the museum has to be a kind of comfort zone. And of course we enjoy this art because we learn to do so, because this is our canon narrative. But it has also been addressed before also here that not everybody enjoys this art, and that, for example, Nolde's paintings can also be seen as racist caricatures, and there's a lot of ugliness in it. So I'm wondering why the museum always has to be so comfortable, and if we are not also working on a museum that also brings up discomfort and questions. And yes.
Thank you. We are actually at the kind of already a little bit over time. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to read the 2 questions from the in the Q&A. And then I would like to give some opportunity. Beatrice, I see you have your hand up, but I would like to give some opportunity for any final words then, and you can address any of the comments in your final words then. So from Margaret Tali, we have a question that reads, it would be very interesting to hear more about the curatorial discussion behind the Stedelijk Museum's show in relation to the search for new techniques to exhibit this history and the works. What kind of techniques did you consider but eventually decided not to include? So I think that's kind of, we're talking about curatorial strategies and techniques, which I think this question addresses. Then Fleur Rose de Cavallo asks, have you ever considered refraining from showing the original artworks, in that sense, bringing everything to the same level of large-scale reproductions? I think that also refers to some of the large-scale photographs on the one hand, and also the kind of painting bronzes that were kind of mediated in some way. So Beatrice, would you like to, I'm going to give it over to you for now.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, maybe just going back to Margaret Tully's question. Yeah, we did consider other techniques, in particular when we were discussing about how to show the colonial exhibitions because of the sensitivity of the material. There was originally the idea of showing all the works behind the kind of milk glass wall that would be put about 20 centimeters before the actual wall. And there would be openings in the wall, but not exactly in front of the work. So you would have to make an effort to see the works, all of them. This was then rejected in the end by the advisory board, basically, because yeah, some remarked quite rightly that it would turn it into a kind of peep show. I mean, people would, rather than having the sensation what you have now with these large photographs being looked at as well and being made aware of your gaze, you would be made aware of your gaze, but maybe in a wrong way. So in that sense, we decided not to do that. And Fleur's question about showing reproductions, no, we didn't consider that. We show the works by Kirchner and Nolde in the original, and we also show the artworks from outside of Europe in the original. We do have some reproductions where we refer to some works by Kirchner and Nolde that are not on display, but really very small reproductions, yeah, in the color of the wall. And then just as a final comment, I think, I mean, what I'm thinking about what you said, Rebecca, and I think that maybe we should have made it, I mean, I think on the one hand, I feel that people are criticizing, of course, that the context is overpowering in this exhibition. So people do feel that it looks different from a normal art exhibition, as it were, or what they are expecting. But yeah, maybe sometimes there are visitors who actually walk through it, and then in the end they say, "Oh, beautiful images by Kirchner and Nolde," and then I feel I failed. I mean, luckily, those are only a small part of the audience, and others do see what it's about. But in that sense, the aesthetic might have helped to make people even more aware.
Thank you, Beatrice. Martin?
Yeah, just in a reaction to Beatrice, your comment that you have the feeling that you failed, and I think that is interesting. That I'm not sure if I enjoyed the paintings, I have to say, and I think you can do both. I think you can take in the context, take in the ugliness that Rebecca was mentioning, but also still enjoying the art. And I feel it has to be so binary, like either you're enjoying the art or you emphasize the ugly history. And I think they're just both sides of the same coin. And yeah, I hope that maybe that's the new art museum that when Modest was talking about in the beginning, like the aesthetic that we enjoy might be different kind of experience, but it's still it can be about beauty, even if you talk about ugliness.
Thank you, Maite. Elena, and then after that, I think we're going to have to wrap up.
Yes. I think that's also a thing that we are discussing a lot in the museum itself, like with all of our exhibitions. Our museum is dedicated to the Brücke artist, to Expressionism. And I feel like after centuries of showing a lot of landscapes, a lot of like portrait shows and everything, like we still have to ask how our younger generation of visitors can connect to Expressionism, how it says something to them, and not only on an aesthetic way. And I feel like a lot of our visitors are also very mature. They're also like longing for critical exhibitions and things to think about and to discuss, and not only have beautiful exhibitions, but have something that speaks to them, that actually is something that they're thinking about in their day-to-day life or in certain areas. And so I think that actually is similar to what Maite said. I think, yeah, there needs to be like a change of a new kind of museum.
Thank you very much, Elena. And with that, I want to bring our discussion to a close with the knowledge that this is not the end of the discussion, even for this symposium that we are continuing tomorrow. And I think, you know, I'm reminded of what Wayne said in the very beginning about that every exhibition is a failure. And but that in that failure are horizons of possibility. And I think just towards the end of the day now, with these looking across these various exhibitions, thinking about this, the issues that have surfaced in them, but also hearing challenges from Rebecca and Nicholas, and the kind of the continuous struggle with the critique that has been articulated, and they're various in kind of coming from various places, that there is a lot of entangled investment in these narratives and in these objects and in these institutions as well. So I imagine that tomorrow a lot more of that will be discussed, a lot more of that will be surfaced. So I invite all of you to return tomorrow following the same link, and we can pursue some of these questions in more detail. Thank you so much to everybody in the panel for your presentations, for showing us not only the results of your work, but especially in the kinds of thinking that went into it, and difficulties that you had to try and address in some way. So with that, I'm going to close the session and the day. Thank you so much.